It was the watermark that finally turned my attention away from Theo's stillness and toward the one person I'd barely questioned, because I'd made the oldest mistake in the book. I'd assumed the dying man at the head of the table was the one thing in this story that didn't need investigating. Lord Calloway kept his private stationery in the study, the same study Lucinda had been rifling through when the lights went out, the same cream stock with the same stationer's watermark, because of course he did. He'd had it for 40 years. It wasn't evidence of an outsider, or even particularly of an insider with patience. It was evidence of a man who'd never had to buy his own paper, twice in his life. I sat with that fact for an hour before I let myself believe what it meant. "You wrote the letters," I said to him the next afternoon, in the same study where his desk still sat, half-ransacked from Lucinda's search. He was in his chair by the window, a blanket over his knees, looking every bit the frail patriarch the rest of the family treated him as. Not someone threatening Edmund. You, threatening yourself into his confidence. So he'd come to you, frightened, and you could watch what he did when he was afraid. He didn't deny it. That, more than anything, told me I was right. He was going to contest the will, Lord Calloway said mildly, as though we were discussing the weather. I'd learned that from his solicitor weeks ago. Edmund thought I intended to leave the estate to Theo, and he'd already begun arranging to challenge it in court, dragging the family name through public hearings, paying lawyers with money that should have stayed in this house. I needed to know how far he'd go, so I gave him something to be afraid of. A few letters, nothing he could trace. And when the lights went out, I went to the library. I told him I knew what he was planning, and that I'd already changed the will to disinherit him entirely, effective that morning. I wanted to see his face when he understood he'd ruined himself for nothing. For the first time, something moved behind his composure. Not guilt, but a flicker of surprise at his own honesty. He came at me with the letter opener, an old man, in the dark, alone with his furious son. "What would you have done, Sarah?" I'd have called out. There were 40 feet between that library and a house full of people. I didn't have 40 feet of breath left in me by then. I had perhaps 10 good seconds before my heart did what it's been threatening to do for a year. He said it without self-pity, which was, in its way, the most convincing part of his account. I turned the blade back toward him. It was faster than thinking. By the time I understood what I'd done, it was done. "You left a note. I told you I'd stop you. In your own hand." A flourish. I wanted it to look like the threat had followed through, like someone outside this family had finally made good on it. I didn't expect anyone to examine the paper closely enough to notice it came from my own desk. A thin, humorless smile. I forgot, I think, that I'd invited the one person in this family who actually notices things. I thought of Marjorie, frightened in her drawing room, certain someone wanted her brother dead, not knowing she'd been half right and half exactly wrong. I thought of Theo's two still hands, which I now understood had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with a man trying not to grieve in front of an audience. I thought of Lucinda's small, ugly, entirely survivable lie, which had never been the lie that mattered. Pruitt took Lord Calloway into custody without much ceremony, the old man rising from his chair with the same unhurried dignity he brought to everything else, as though being arrested for his son's murder were simply one more household matter to be managed correctly. The will, it turned out, hadn't been changed after all. There hadn't been time. Theo inherited everything by simple accident of being the only son left standing. I left the estate the way I'd arrived, in the back of the Bentley, watching the gargoyles recede in the rear window. Marjorie had asked me to find out who wanted her brother dead. I had. It had simply never occurred to either of us that the answer would be the man who'd built the house we were both sitting in, or that wanting someone afraid and wanting them dead could end, in the space of 10 unbreathing seconds, as the exact same thing.